Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Lead Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I am PJ along with my co-host, Mr. Shiles. About to be at some point in probably the next year or so, might be Reverend Shiles. You might be ordained.
Okay. Yeah.
So I see it in your future.
Okay. That's
so
cool.
Yeah. Well, so we are in part 2 from last week.
And we're wearing the same clothes.
And we're wearing the same clothes again. You know, we had to say that, I guess, the last time we did a part 1 and part 2. And
I should have messed with you. I was going to put my jacket on. Dang.
Because I am going to be gone. Well, I guess, I was gone Monday. So, and that's usually when we record.
You are currently on spring break.
I am currently on spring break.
As people are listening and watching this.
Absolutely.
And you are not working.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
That is, well, I hope it's accurate. So I'm going to read into my future and say, I pray that it's accurate, that I am not working that Wednesday when it drops.
Good.
And that I would not have been working, too, that Monday in which we would have recorded.
Yes.
So, anywho, now you're probably very confused, but this is part 2 of Acts 16, and you also this past weekend heard from Pastor Shaddy, so I do hope and pray that you enjoyed that. I know that I would have enjoyed preaching at Lake Mary and just, again, sharing the idea that we are part of the Big C Church, and we are wanting to be part of God building His kingdom, not our own little kingdoms.
Amen. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look back on this Acts 16 message, the lessons in mission. If you didn't hear last week, definitely go back and listen to part 1. We talked about several different things, but let me remind us of our main point. Lessons enhance our understanding, and if enacted, make us more effective in our mission. We started out talking about why that's even important, right? We reflected on many of us can relate to why leadership lessons are important, especially Monday through Friday. But why is it important for everybody that's a believer to really be concerned with being effective in mission? And then we spent some time digging into this big idea of contextualization. So if you didn't listen to it, definitely go back to it. But today we're going to dig into the next 3. So we'll look at lesson number 2, which is vision. God gives His people visions to accomplish His mission. We'll look at evangelism, which is look for the lost so that they may be found. And we'll talk about suffering. Dark nights, our songs in darkness shine Jesus' light for salvation. So I'm ready to just dig right in.
Let's do it.
Okay. So vision. God gives His people visions to accomplish His mission. So something I wanted to start with, and this will be a bit of a doozy to start with, but we're just going to dig right in. Can you clarify the difference between spirit promoted and spirit-inspired revelation?
Yeah.
So you said God-given visions are spirit-promoted communication. God-given visions are not spirit-inspired revelations. So this idea of revelation, I think, is something important for us to clarify.
Yeah, and so revelation, I'm talking more specifically, when I say revelation, is that the Spirit of God would come upon individuals and they would write down God's revelation. Now, so through the Spirit-inspired revelation, and that's what we have in terms of the Bible.
Inspired Word of God.
Yeah. So that ministry has ceased, according to like most of the scholars and theologians, that the Spirit of God has not given you new revelation. Now, I want you to understand that there will be times that the Spirit gives me or anybody else inspiration on what is revealed. Okay?
Yeah.
So, but it's not new revelation.
Yeah, because God is still speaking.
He's still speaking.
Yeah.
Okay?
But it's not new revelation.
It's not new revelation.
Yeah.
Now, there might be a time where, okay, so I just said something to the effect that I can see in the next year where you are ordained.
Yeah.
Okay, so but that would not be a realm of revelation. That would be a realm of discernment. I've seen your life.
Yeah.
I've seen how God has wired you, how you're faithfully serving Him, and I'm like, so you have some characteristics and you're meeting qualifications that I would see that would be pastor material. So I'm discerning. So I'm not going and I'm predicting that you will be. You know, God has given me discernment.
Right.
You know, and so this would be Spirit, in some sense, prompted discernment about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but what we wanted to cover in Acts 16, and you see it another 4 to kind of 5 times throughout the book of Acts, is this idea of visions and dreams. And you could even say, I mean, if you wanted a synonym, you could say revelation, that God revealed to him that he was going to go, but it was a vision. The word is horama. It's not the same word as revelation. So he's getting a vision and a dream for a specific element of mission for him to fulfill. Okay, so that's why I wanted to be very clear, because I do know that there are people out there that they abuse an idea of revelation. Well, God revealed to me that you need to blank, and and again, if there is a discernment where the Spirit has given them discernment about something, but I am very, very, very cautious and leery of people saying God has revealed to me specifically blank. So that's why I wanted to drill down on that and really clarify that what we see here is that the Spirit is prompting, and you can even say Spirit prompted, Spirit inspired communication. That the Spirit is inspiring Paul with this vision and dream to go to Macedonia to bring the gospel.
Well, and you followed that up with then saying God-given visions will point people to fulfill some element of God's mission.
Yes.
For me, I think that is such an important point, an important way for us to discern, hey, does it align with God? And in order to do this, then we have to think about, okay, what is God's mission?
Yeah.
And for me, I think that helps to point back to the importance of what we've been doing the last couple years, and what we even said at the beginning was we need to know, we can't just be apathetic to, oh yeah, that's just for the professionals. But, I think this is a way for us to really say, like, hey, in order to discern well in our own lives, how does this connect with God's mission? Well, in order to do that, we need to know what God's bigger mission is, and then how do we fit into it?
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, very accurate. I mean, which is why, like I was saying, God didn't give you again, in terms of a vision or dream, God didn't give you a vision or dream to be wealthy. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. Or a Lamborghini. God, and sometimes, God gave me a vision that I ought to do this. Okay, and it's all about you. I'm going to tell you, God hasn't given you a dream or a vision to do anything outside of participating in some element of His mission. So it's not going to be solo. It's not going to be a dream or a vision that is solo or individually solely applied to you. And now it will be for you, but ultimately for God's mission, some element of it. And it goes back to what we talked about last week in terms of why many Christians don't even want to hear a message on the lessons of mission, is because we have so culturally conditioned them to think church is all about them. And so in some sense, we're going to apply dreams and visions individually. Well, hang on. I'm telling you, I promise you, when you look at all the ways that when you see that word horama used in Acts, it is going to be for some element of God's mission for someone else, not you. Which is why, like, I want people, man, I'm sure, well, I know, like, so Bud Apt and Peter Travers had a vision, a dream to start Life Prep. It wasn't about them. Who was it about? It was about seniors in high school to prepare them for after. And now, he's given Liz Gritter and Jack Gritter that same vision to come behind and take that and to, that's a vision and dream. When CAC, now Mephibo's house, when it was created, somebody had a dream, a vision, a passion to do that. Same thing with Life Hope. So there are people like Greg Hodges has a passion. I have not really ever asked him, well, where did that even come to have passion for prison ministry, Bridges of America? But I'm telling you, God, there are people out there. There are pockets of people. There might be an individual, it might be a group of people, it might be a demographic, it might be a niche group. They are waiting for God to give you a dream and a vision to take to reach them. I'm telling you, that's why. What would it look like? I mean, this is what I get really excited about. What would it look like if the 2,000 people that we have at Northland, and probably more, in a given month, in terms of, average month over month, we probably have about 2,400 regular people that would call Northland home. Well, what if just 50% of them had a God-given vision to actually participate and fulfill some element of his mission? There are people out there that love Jesus, but man, they have been so gifted in leadership. And I think about Steve French, a dream to engage leaders. Denise Rousseau, God's and so. But how because when you look at Paul's vision that God gave him, it was in line with his passions too. Yeah. It was in line with his gifting. It was in line with how he was wired. It wasn't something from left field. It was something that he was already doing, but it was now more specific. Go to Macedonia. So that's where I'm like, what are you passionate about? How has God wired you? And then begin to seek him and go, give me a dream, give me a vision, give me a harama. Yeah. Like I was telling the staff, a week ago, you were in the meeting where I said the 4 C's. And I did say this at the 9 o'clock that week, is that the 4 C's was the vision that God gave me, that I knew that he was calling me to Northland. Because even those other contexts, in which I had an opportunity that God eventually closed the doors. I had not thought, again, this is where I had not thought specifically about certain things. And so I thought God was opening up the door, but there was in some sense no vision that God had given me in those moments. But when I first started talking to the Northland leadership and started to hear where they were, I'm telling you, I started to see these things. And I had never used 4 C's before. Wow. I never used connect, cultivate, care, commission. Now, when I got here in all, because this is how God has wired me now and I've grown in my leadership, I did not come and give the 4 C's to people and say, this is what we're going to do. I took them through a training session of all of the places that God's mission is seen throughout Scripture. Yep. Also, we went through an exercise of all of these places where God's mission is seen and that he's given an aspect of his mission to his people. And we had 40 different verbs. And then I said, narrow it down to 4 or 5 buckets. Yeah. And then we started to give shape and formation. But it was the vision that God gave me about the 4 C's. And I'm like, okay, this is he is really leading me here. So that's how vision works.
And it was connected to your understanding and your knowledge of the Bible, the greater biblical narrative, and as you walked us through that process, it was rooted in, like you said, those 40 scriptures, so that we could see and understand the greater picture, the greater narrative, and how this fits into it. Yeah. Which just totally changes it, right? It's just not an idea for man, but it is it inspired by God, connected to his mission.
Right.
Yeah, connected to his mission. So when we think about this idea of vision and visions, I was wondering if you can clarify a bit. So specifically organizational leadership, you like to teach on mission, vision, structure, strategy. Mm-hmm. We talk about vision, like a vision for a church or an organization versus visions that an individual receives. Is that really one and the same, just kind of different methods, or is there a clear distinction that you can help us understand there?
No, so it would be and there's many words like this, light and light.
Mm-hmm.
Like something can be light, not heavy, and something can be light, which isn't dark.
Sure.
Okay, so the way I use mission and vision, so mission is the why, the vision is the what. What do we need to do in order to accomplish the mission? Visions and dreams like here is what is God leading us to. There might be a specific area, a specific people, a specific way He wants us to do something.
Yeah.
And so that vision is used in that regard. The way I use vision in terms of a leadership way, in terms of mission and vision, is what do we need to do in order to accomplish the mission? And then to really confuse you, I do teach that there are times where you need a strategic plan or a strategic vision. What would you like to see 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And then you start making a list of what God's put in your heart that you would like to see, 3 years, 5 years from now. And when you make that list and you can kind of now discern and go, okay, let's narrow down this list of what we think God really is leading us to in this strategic vision of what we would like to see. Well, then you work your way back and you create a strategic plan that will help you, and what do you need to do in order to accomplish this strategic vision? So you got vision in the sense of mission and vision. Mission is why we are here. Vision is what we want to do, what we want to see people do in order to accomplish the mission. So here at Northland, we want to see people connect with one another in God, cultivate disciples and leaders, care for people and resources, and be commissioned to neighbors and nations. That's what we want to see them do. It's the activity of God's church in order to participate in God's mission, right? Then in this particular text, we're going to see visions, dreams that God gives individuals. And sometimes He could even give a body, like,
Sure.
A church body, based upon the, kind of speaking to the leaders there. This is what I want to see you do that will help fulfill an element of my mission. And then there are, kind of strategic visions or plans that you might have of what you would like to see accomplished in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah, I think might be getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think that's helpful because that can be very practical. I mean, we've always talked about how important it is to define terms, and I think this again gets into how the gospel can be relevant in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
Right. Both personally and then professionally in whatever we're doing. And the more we are considering that, discerning that, I think the more you do it really well where you are constantly going between organizational leadership, structure, thinking, and the gospel. But for many, those are just totally divorced, right? So it can feel it can feel very foreign to do that. But I think the more that we think about that, let the gospel transform every aspect of their life, it just becomes a lot more normal and natural. And then when we are living our everyday life, it just becomes okay, what does the Bible say about this? What does the gospel say about this? And that's when we are continually being renewed and transformed. So I really appreciate you bringing the quote business aspect to these conversations, because even though you are bringing the business aspect, you never leave it there. I mean, it reminds me of what Sam Serto, Dr. Serto, is so passionate about. It's always about the gospel. It's always about the gospel, and this is how you are training us and teaching us to however you're wired, whatever you're passionate about. is the foundation, the gospel. Make sure that is the strong foundation. Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's move on to number 3, and that's evangelism.
Yep.
This is look for the lost so that they may be found. There's a couple points here. First is some people will be ready to be found. Lydia was an example of that. Some people need to be free to be found. That was the slave girl. And then we talked about the law of gospel motion. That might be one of my favorite things that you have taught us and introduced to us. I think about that quite often. So let's start with some people ready to be found. You laid out for us this essentially this question, who is ready to be found? I thought that was such an interesting thing for us to consider. I think in my life and as I've considered others, we can so easily just kind of blanket it with we need to share the gospel with our life and with our words. We just need to share the gospel. But we might miss that discerning part of, hey, there's people that God's placing in your life that are, quote, low-hanging fruit, that are much more apt and ready to receive.
Yeah.
So you want to remind us some of those areas that you
and I'll
expand on them,
and I'll add one too.
Only one?
Well, I mean, one is actually a really big demographic too.
Okay.
But you got the church. I mean, there are a lot of people who attend church. They are ready to be found. It could be children.
Yeah.
It could be students. I mean, obviously it can be adults, but they're ready to be found. They've never, because here's the thing, they've never put their faith. They know intellectually, and there is a difference between knowing of and knowing. Of saying I need to put my faith from actually putting your faith in Jesus. So church people, de-church, people who were once in church, now they're not in church. And I'm not saying that every de-church person isn't saved. So I want to be very clear, that they very well may have come to know Jesus at some point and maybe church hurt. They're not in church right now. But my point then was there might be people who have been a part of a church, but they never put their faith in Jesus, but they've not necessarily changed in some sense, their worldview. They just don't go to church, but they never put their faith in Jesus. So it's not going to be foreign to them showing up and going,
sure.
So de-churched. And then, again, those in counseling, because they're in counseling for a reason.
Yeah, there's a recognition that they're working on something. Something is not right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now here, so here's a group that I would add that I just didn't want to get into it because I didn't have time.
Okay.
Is the religiously unaffiliated. So the nuns.
Okay.
So not the NUNS, the nuns, that not them, the Catholic women who are, we're not talking about them, we're talking about the NONES, the religiously unaffiliated. Now, why would I say that some of them are ready to be found? Okay, so Rodney Stark, who is the author of The Triumph of Christianity, here's what he writes in his book. People will attempt to conserve their religious capital. People will not tend to change religions, and the greater the religious capital, the less likely they are to change. Okay, so meaning this is that if you find somebody who is entrenched in Buddhism, entrenched in Islam, these people are highly devoted and religious to these religions. What Rodney Stark is saying is that anybody who wants to conserve their religious capital, who has a lot of religious capital, they're not going to change very easily. Okay, so they're not your low-hanging fruit. Okay,
because they're devoted.
They're devoted.
Yeah.
So he's saying those people who are less devoted, less entrenched into something, that have, in some sense, not a lot of religious capital, those people are easier to change.
Yeah.
So he goes on to say, converts overwhelmingly are recruited from the ranks of those having a very weak commitment to any religion. So when you look at the gospel in the early church and in the first century in the Roman Empire, you tended to have people who were very weak or had a weak commitment to any religion. Okay, so yes, they did have in some sense, a cult religion in terms of their mythology and the temples, but they believed that these gods were not really heavily involved in their life, so they would sacrifice just to appease them, to keep them at bay. Okay, right. So when they're looking at the church and how devoted they are and how their devotion is actually enhancing life of other people, and they're seeing their kind of weak commitment to their own cult religion, to whatever, again, it was in those cities, then it was easy for them to change from their weak commitment of their religious identity to now a very strong religious identity. So what we are seeing today in the rise of the nuns is that there is a weak commitment to any kind of ideology or religious faith. So if we, and this is why contextualization is so important. Yeah. So if we can contextualize the gospel to many of these nuns, they actually are ready to be found. Because what you actually will find, even in some of the nuns, is that they have deconstructed their grandparents' or their parents' faith, and they've just not reconstructed it with anything. So once again, I'm not saying the whole group of nuns are ready to be found, because some of them actually might need to be freed to be found. Yeah. But some of them are ripe for the finding because they have a very weak commitment or tie to any kind of religious identity or faith.
Yeah, sometimes we can think the opposite, right? There's an apathy there, so they're not going to want to be found because they're not going to want to commit to something. But that's the opposite, right? We see this with cultural Muslims and nominal Muslims as well. I've read and I've seen this in my own experience, where it's one thing for the devoted, like you were talking about, but it's a whole nother thing when it was just it's what they grew up in. Yeah. And there wasn't devotion. You talk about Ramadan and didn't really practice Ramadan. That's a real. If you're exploring somebody from a Muslim country and you want to know how devoted they've ever been, ask them about Ramadan. Have they ever practiced Ramadan? There's a high devotion there, right? Fasting, food, water from sunup to sundown for 30 days. Yep. But if they haven't and they grew up in that context, then that's a good indicator for us. Okay, the devotion is low, and what you're saying is that there's a greater opportunity there. They may be ready.
I mean, I'm agreeing with Rodney Stark.
Sure.
So yeah. I mean, because you see, because he was going to say, he's because his book and his research is around how did the church grow so rapidly, when I say rapidly, I mean, he actually says it's incremental and cumulative over. So it's basically just the way compound interest works. Yeah. That's the way he charts like the growth of the church. But how it took in some sense, how it took the Roman Empire by storm is through this empire that is really filled with people who have weak ties to religion.
Yeah, and I think the lesson for us is as we encounter friends and family that have no spiritual affiliation, don't be discouraged. Don't write them off. Look for that discernment and see some signs where they may be ready. And really, you gave us some of those signs. You said listen to people. Yep. You said consider some of the phrases they use. I feel lost. I don't know why I'm here. No one appreciates me. Those are open doors for gospel conversations.
Oh my gosh, yes. And the way you get to hear those is if you get to know someone. So if you don't take time to get to know people, and again, ask genuine questions, build relationships with them. If you create a safe enough environment, like that's one of the things here just on staff, we're trying to create an environment where it's okay to share that you're not okay right now, right? So, but that comes from a safe environment that is created.
Yeah.
Many people don't see relationships as safe until they actually get to know you, and then they begin to share just a little bit more.
Right.
That's where these statements are going to pop up. Is when you know people, they then, in some sense, show up to be known through sharing.
And you can really set yourself apart just by listening.
Just being a good listener, yeah, and
then closing your yap.
Close your app, yeah. Empathy, not always trying to solve somebody's issue, Yeah,
there's a phrase that we learned in marriage prep that I need to use more often than not with Kaylee is fix it or feel it.
Yeah.
She'll give me she'll share about her day and I'll start to try to fix it.
Yeah.
Says I just want you to feel it, right? A lot of these conversations as they're getting into the areas of their life, you probably have to feel it for a while before you can introduce Jesus, because you're ultimately not going to fix it.
Yeah.
You introduce Jesus and he will.
Right.
But you might not be able to do that first conversation, second, third, fourth. But that's where really listening is a powerful thing. So I love that you brought that out because how are we going to know,
Yeah. But here's what I would also say, here's what you read in Acts 16. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. So these people are already engaging in some kind of, again, these are more than likely Gentiles who did fear God. They were God-fearers, just like Cornelius. And so we sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. So I just want to be really clear on this regard, is that some people are ready to be found, but it is still a work of God. Is that the Lord opened up her heart. So I did say that, but I want to really stress that it still is a work of God where God opened up her heart to respond to Paul's message. And then she was baptized.
Yeah.
So she was seeking, she was ready to be found. Paul comes, shares the message, God opens up her heart, and she responds. So even in these questions, what we're also praying for is that God would open up their heart. Open up their heart. Oh, they're so, I've heard people say, oh, they're so close. They're so close. All right, so here's the thing. What you're saying is they're ready to be found, but we need the Lord to open up their heart.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well said. So that next section under evangelism was some people need to be free to be found. Yeah. What are some thoughts that you want to share about?
I mean, just stressing there are many ways that people can be enslaved. They can obviously be enslaved, spiritually. And you could even say, Lydia, to a degree, was enslaved spiritually per se. But she's ready, though. I mean, she's seeking the Lord. And now Paul's just going to clarify, okay, here's who you need to direct your attention to, Jesus. He's come to make you new. He's come to reconcile you to God. Okay, so she was ready, but there are some people enslaved spiritually. So you can think of people who are religiously devoted. Okay, so maybe you can think of Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. You can think of those those who practice Islam, devout Buddhist. I mean, maybe even devout secularist. I mean, they are enslaved spiritually. So it's going to take some time. There's going to have to be some freeing that happens, which is still a work of God, because how did Paul free her? In the name of Jesus, right? But again, this young girl, because of her enslavement, she's not looking. She doesn't know that she needs to be. She's not ready to be found. And then she was enslaved culturally or socially. Like she was being abused from a cultural and social standpoint by these men who had enslaved her because she brought them great profit. And so there's various other ways that people can be enslaved, and I talked through some of them. And people can be enslaved by their past, so that's maybe through church hurt or church bigotry. Maybe they are enslaved by their intellectual capacity or captivity. And then some people are really enslaved by their stupidity and ignorance. They don't even care about learning, so they have completely shut down. And here's the thing. Because an intellectual is going to expand their intellectual capacity, but because of how intellectual they are, they're not going to listen to you in some sense, bringing in faith in the matter. Because unless they can see it, feel it, touch it, they we're driven by what science and whatever it may be.
Sure.
Then there are just some people that they're just held captive by their stupidity and ignorance. And so, but they're going to need to be free to be found. And there's a way that God can use you. And that's where I think really asking good, valid, sincere, not antagonistic questions. So again, not antagonistic questions can be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay? Some people need to be freed by overwhelming burdens. That's why we want to have, these ministries of mercy.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some burdens out there. They can't even think straight because they are overwhelmed with their life circumstances. Social enslavement. You have people who have been abused, whether it's sexually, verbally, and until they can kind of come out of that kind of victim mentality to even come up for air, they're just not ready. So there's so many different ways that people are enslaved that they need to be freed in order to be found. And again, we don't see in the text where the young slave girl is found. So, but scholars would say that what you have going on in Acts 16, so they are going to project something in at least from the slave girl's perspective, is that Lydia came to know Jesus, the Philippian jailer came to know Jesus, their entire household comes to know Jesus, and so they think sandwiched in between, this slave girl is another example how she's freed to be found. So that's where I say she's free to be found. Right. And so, so scholars believe that at some point, whether, not too long after that, she comes to know Jesus and she becomes part of the church there in Philippi. But I would also like to share, because I didn't want to put the jailer, under this point, because I was going to get to him in the suffering, because God does use Paul and Silas's suffering as a catalyst for the jailer, but he was getting ready to take his life. So we did see that. He was getting ready to take his life. So you can add a third category. Some people need to be calmed to be found, because he had now this crisis in his life. He had such a crisis that he is ready to take his own life. He's getting ready to end his life, but what Paul, again, you have to understand, this is how the church needs to be present and look for evangelistic opportunities, even in the midst of their own suffering, is that this guy oversaw their beating. He oversaw them being thrown into prison, and now he's getting ready to take his life because he thinks the prisoners had escaped. And what Paul says is stop. Yeah. He says stop. So the jailer, so the jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself."
We're all here.
Okay, so why? Here's the thing. He's still battered and bruised from his own beating that he took. Yet, he has enough awareness and has enough capacity to be going, it's not just about me.
Right.
it's about what God's doing in this situation, and so he kind of intercedes, he interrupts, and he calms the jailer down. Some people in life, I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of people overwhelmed right now. They're at a crisis. They have no hope. Like this jailer had no hope.
Yeah.
And to the degree he's going to take his life. So right now, suicide up across the board. People are without hope. So how can God use you to bring calmness, to interrupt people's chaos, to calm them in order to be found? Because that's when we see, so the jailer called for the lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" If Paul would not have stopped the jailer would not be in heaven. I'm going to let that sink in.
Yeah.
If he would not, in his own prison, like when I say in Paul's own dark night,
Literal. Yeah.
that God is doing something to free him, but understanding that his freedom was not for himself.
Right.
His freedom was to be used for God, right?
Powerful.
So there's a third. So some people are ready to be found, some people need to be free to be found, and then some people need to be calmed to be found because they have a crisis in their life. Because again, the young girl didn't know that she had a crisis. The young girl didn't know that she was enslaved. There are a lot of people, they don't know that they are enslaved, so they need to be free to be found. There are some people, they are at wit's end. There is no hope. They're in crisis mode, and they just need somebody to come in, interrupt their life, calm them, so they can be found. So that, and then all of that, within all of that too is that law of gospel motion. Is that whenever we participate in God's mission, God's gospel mission, the good news that in Jesus, through his death and resurrection, he's making all things new, that we got to share it and show it. Whenever we participate in mission, the law of gospel motion, there's always an attempt by the evil one and the evil forces to have an equal and opposite, and there's an attempt. They cannot have the same force, because the force of the gospel is more powerful than any spiritual force out there. But it doesn't stop them from attempting.
Right.
So just be aware of that.
Well, and that does really lead to and connects to that fourth lesson about suffering.
Yeah.
Our songs in darkness shine Jesus' light for salvation. So I'm sure you have some things on suffering. A question I have is, there is a distinction between suffering for the gospel and suffering because of sin, right? Because of either done by you or to you.
Well, I preached on this. I preached on this particular passage in the transition series. Now, this is early on, so almost
a long
time ago. And I think I may have dealt with it before, but you have to understand, why do we suffer? So so at the core, we suffer because we live in a fallen world. Yeah. So there's just going to be things that happen in our life as a result of living in a fallen world. Yeah. There are going to be some things that we do that bring about our own suffering. So, for instance, if we smoke for 30 years and we get lung cancer, listen. Okay, you can say that we live in a fallen world, and I got lung cancer because I live in a fallen world. No, you got lung cancer because you smoked. Now, do some people get lung cancer through secondhand smoke, and they don't? Yes, but I'm just saying, there are some things that we do to ourselves, and because of our sin, it brings about suffering. Then there are some times where someone else's sin is imposed on us, and we experience suffering as a result of someone else's sin. Yeah. And in this regard, you have someone else's, and then you could even say, because we live in a world where the spiritual forces of darkness are at work, and they are allowed to have their force and their operation in the world. There are going to be some times where, because of gospel ministry, we are we are subject to those forces.
Yeah.
But in any case, how do we respond to suffering? How do we respond to suffering just living in a fallen world? How do we respond to, in some sense, suffering that we caused? How do we respond to suffering that was something done to us by another? How do we respond to suffering that is from I would say, now again, when you look at Jesus, okay, so he didn't sin, but he came to take upon himself the judgment of the sin of the world. And what you see now converging at the cross is the Jewish sin and the Roman sin. You also see, because it was going to be the cross where Jesus, he fulfills the prophecy of crushing the head of Satan. So this is going to be a way that Satan also attacks Jesus to try to crush him. So Jesus is now, the conversion of sin done to him, the forces of Satan coming against him is now converging at the cross. And how does he respond? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. And into your hands I commit my spirit. Because he ultimately knew that through suffering, God was going to bring about salvation.
Yeah.
And so that's part of where we're going to now take upon the perspective of Jesus, in that even if we caused it, hey, let's repent if we caused it, we're going to repent of our sin, but we are going to submit ourselves. We're going to say, into your hands I commit my spirit. God, will you use it now for others' good? Will you use it for your glory and others' good? And I'm going to submit my suffering into your hands, and will you do something with it for a miraculous end, right? If somebody's done something to us, we're going to release them from the penalty of that. We're going to forgive them. That doesn't mean forgive and forget, but again, regardless of how the suffering happened, Jesus is still calling us to respond the way Paul and Silas responded. That's the power of suffering, which is why I do not believe in the prosperity gospel.
Right.
Is that when you follow Jesus, everything is not going to be peachy and hunky-dory. Everything is just not going to fall in line, where you're going to have health and wealth and prosperity to the end of days, and nothing bad is ever going to happen to you. That is a theology from the pit of hell. A theology from the pit of hell. This is more the theology of heaven. That yes, there's going to be times where you experience prosperity. There's going to be times where you experience the flourishing of life. But then there are going to be times as you live faithful. just faithful lives. There's going to be times where you feel like you're going through a valley. There's going to be times where you're like, why in the world did I get cancer? Why in the world did my child, and you're going to be like, what in the world? How do I respond? I'm going to tell you, this is how biblically you are to respond. And it's not easy. It is not easy. Because we want to blame, we want to point fingers, we want to cry foul, we want to scream out, God, why? And again, God can handle you screaming out why. I've preached on suffering to that degree. I'm talking about lessons in mission.
Yeah.
This is why, again, you have to understand the context of the message. Is I'm talking about lessons in mission. And you see it not only with the Apostle Paul, you see it in the letter to the Hebrew. You see the letter to the, when I say the Hebrews, that were Jews spread out all throughout the diaspora. You see it you see it in the letter, the epistle that Peter's going to write. That there is an element of God working missionally in how we respond to suffering. James, the half-brother of Jesus, in his letter, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kind, because it's actually doing something in you and through you. So if the church today, across the world, the globe, and again, some of our brothers and sisters in the Middle East, China, they're experiencing this in a whole different realm. But if we can understand how we respond to suffering in a way that displays the perspective of God, our dependence on Him, and our worship to Him in suffering, God's going to supernaturally work in a way that will free others up to experience their freedom in Jesus.
Well said.
Well, so I think we can end on that.
Let's wrap up.
So, well, Northland family and friends, it has been a joy to do part 1, part 2 about lessons in mission.
Yep.
And I do pray that we will continue to have an open heart and an open posture to learn how we can be more effective, not just learning lessons about mission, but actually enacting these lessons, exercising these lessons, because we truly want to be a church here at Northland that is on mission. Well, we love you. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.